remember from a very young age with my parents, whether it was allowance or a first job, it said, pay yourself first. Pay yourself first. If you have $1, save 10 cents. Pay yourself first. Did I do that? No. I went to college, I did what so many young people do. And one day you look up and say, I haven't done a very good job of it. But it's never too late to start. And again, starting with our young women and teaching them about finance, giving them financial education very early, not only through the work that they will do here today, but what they do year-long under the guidance of Miss Yanita Ruth is something that we believe very strongly in. I don't want to stand any longer between you and this fabulous keynote speaker. It's Medina Jett. She's an attorney, founder and CEO of the Integrated Compliance Solutions Group, LLC, ICS Group, LLC, a legal and compliance firm serving the financial services industry. She's also the co-founder and chair of Financial Literacy for All, which she operates alongside her son Andre and daughter Taylor. To learn more about all of Medina's fabulous accomplishments, please look at her bio in our program booklet. So without any further ado, I welcome a friend, a soarer, and an all-around fabulous woman, ladies and gentlemen, Medina Jett.
Yeah, Medina!
Good morning, ladies. Good morning. For those of you who saw the video that I had circulating around promoting this event, folks said you were in our face with the Good Morning Ladies, so it's nice to see so many familiar faces here. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for the Y for giving me this opportunity to address you here today. Something that's so very near and dear to my heart. I am honored to be the first keynote speaker to address you at the very first money conference to be named after the former Connecticut State Treasurer, Denise Nappier, a woman who I greatly admire, and it's just my honor to be here to talk to you about money, all things money, how we generate wealth, how we spend it, and how we use it to create our legacies as women. That's always a very difficult thing. I think a lot of times I'm gonna share some of my story, which I won't bore you with all the details, but I came from Connecticut, I'm from Connecticut originally, grew up in what was then known as the inner city of New Haven. I grew up on Maxwell Avenue. My family is what I would refer to as the working poor. My father worked at Colt Firearms in the manufacturing line. My mother was a switchboard operator at the telephone company. But we never really understood the magnitude of our financial state. We were poor, and as a lot of people, we didn't really know it because I grew up in one certainly neighborhood, and we were no different than anybody else in our neighborhood. But I always remember growing up, my mother would say, get a good education so you can change your situation. Get a good education so you can change your situation. And I always thought, okay, I gotta study hard because there's something else out there for me, although I wasn't sure what that was. And it wasn't until I got to about 6th grade that one of my teachers started to say, you know, you don't belong in the public school system. We gotta get you to this school called Hopkins. And I'm going to, I have a couple of photos just to kind of take you back to that time. So that's me. And so you'll see there, people always joke that I was already primed for the corporate world. And I hung over with my siblings and my dad. And so around that time, which I think in that picture I was probably in 6th grade when my teacher said, you know, you need to go into a different school. There's so much more that you can be doing outside of the space that you're in, and I want to help you change that trajectory. And so I'll never forget the night before I had to go to take an admissions test to Hopkins, Roots previewed. And I'm not sure how many in the room remember when Roots premiered back in 1977. I stayed up, my brothers and sisters and I were watching the movie, and my mother kept saying, you gotta go to bed, you gotta take that test. And the longer I stayed up and watched the movie, the more I got angry, and the more I started to realize that the state that we were in, the situation that we were in, was something not totally of our own doing. There's a lot of history that goes along with that. And so the next morning, we get up and we're driving up to Hopkins, and Hopkins was the most picturesque, beautiful oasis of a place, 15 minutes from my poor neighborhood in New Haven. I'd never heard of the school, I'd never been there, but the differences between where I grew up and that place at the top of the hill where they all were, it was like night and day. And so I get up to this place and I walk into this huge room. It was the testing room that they had converted from the cafeteria. And I look around the room and all I saw was a sea of white kids. You know, coming from New Haven, I was in the public schools. I had a few white kids in my school, but for the most part, it was a very black environment. And so I remember sitting there, remember it's the morning after Roots. I still, and even at that young age, I was pretty feisty. You know, so I was angry. And I sat there, I looked out the window, and I looked at the life that they were enjoying versus the life that me and my friends and family were enjoying. And I said, gee, there's something so unfair about this. But I remember that situation just created such a fire in me that there was no way I was not passing that test that day. And I remember sitting there, and every time I would take a break, I'd look around and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm coming to this. And I kept on testing, and eventually I was accepted to Hopkins. Out of a class of 100 kids, there was me, and there was one other girl of color, and we were it for a class of 100. Of the mayor of New Haven, Mayor Daniels. And so Leslie Daniels and I started out as the two girls of color in our class, and I remember just daily thinking, I am not my situation. And so every day, I would compete with these kids who didn't come from schools like the public schools in New Haven. They came from very good educational backgrounds, and being able to compete with them on a daily basis was one of the hardest things I had to do every day, going home and studying probably twice as long as they ever had to study. I mean, and you all know, we're all told we gotta work twice as hard. And I learned that since I was in 6th grade. And so I did that, and I kept thinking, if I study hard, I can get the grades, I'll get into college, and I will be where they are one day. There was nothing, though, that was more shocking or eye-opening for me in terms of how poor I really was and how desperately I wanted to get out of my situation than going to a school like Hopkins. At the time, we had what was known as a work-study program, where everybody who was there on scholarship, we had to work to basically put in some sweat equity, show them how much we enjoyed the privilege of going to their school. And so I had to sweep sidewalks and empty trash cans and all types of things while my classmates enjoyed their free time. They could actually do their homework during study hall, but I had to go through and empty the trash cans in the rooms that they were. And all of that, I think, built character, but it also kept that fire going, that I am eventually going to be out of this situation. It wasn't until the winter of 1979, I think, that I had what I consider to be a transformative experience. My mother was unable to buy oil for the furnace that winter. And I would say what had happened was, she explained to us that Hopkins required her to pay a portion, a very small portion, of the tuition towards our bill. And she had a choice to make, either keep us in school or keep us from work. Any mother given that choice So she made the choice of keeping us in school. We made the choice that we will get firewood and we'll turn the oven up and open the door and we'll try to stay warm that way. So this one particular week, we were on break from school and we were huddling around the fireplace, and it was a really bad snowstorm. And so we couldn't go out and find wood because guess what? It's all over the snow. You know? And so one of my mother's friends had told her about this place in New Haven where you could go where they were giving out free firewood. So we all piled in the car. We drove over to, I think it was the Hearth, they called it. But we got there, and because it was so cold out and it was no snowstorm, everybody was looking for firewood. And by the time we got there, it was all gone. And so I remember my mother looked at us with this desperate look like, what are we going to do? And I remembered that up at Hopkins, we were clearing a field for a new gym, and all of the trees that had been cut down, they had piled high in this wood. It was like an oasis of wood. And how could I have forgotten about the wood up at Hopkins? So we jump in the car, we battle the storm, we get up to Hopkins, and I show them where the wood is, and my brothers are putting the wood in the trunk of the car, and all of a sudden, through the heavy snowstorm, we see headlights coming, and there's a truck coming in the snow. And we all stop, like, uh-oh, are we in trouble? What's going on? The truck gets closer and closer, and I realized it's a maintenance truck from one of the employees at Hopkins. And I was, with a sigh of relief. I'm like, oh, that's just Mr. Frank from maintenance. It's okay. So he comes over, he stops, and I said, hi, Mr. Frank, I'm Medina Jett, I'm a student here. And, we needed some firewood because we don't have heat, and so I thought we could take some of the wood. And he looked at me, and he said, put it back. It's funny, years later, he said, put every piece of it back. And so my brother started to unload the wood from the car, and he put it back. And as we drove home, we were just silent, stunned. I know we were probably thinking, gee, how cold it's gonna be when we get back to the house. But something about that moment, that experience, I vowed to myself then that I would never be in a situation like that. My kids would never know what it's like to be without and have to rely on somebody else for such a basic need of warmth. And I'm sorry, I should have known I was done this was gonna happen. It's emotional. But that's what I call that rock bottom moment for me. When I decided that I'm going to do something different to change my story and to change the story of the people who come behind me and the generations that come after that. I had a woman once tell me a story that when she found her rock bottom moment, she said she found herself flat broke 3 days before her next payday. She went into a grocery store, Stop and Shop. Okay, that's not my station. She went into a grocery store and she stole a package of
That's all right. That's what sisterhood's about.
And a package of that sliced cheese. And she was going to feed her kids with that until she got paid. She slipped these stolen products into her oversized Gucci handbag and walked out the store. And when she got home, as she pulled her goods out of her bag, she said the thought hit her like a ton of bricks, like, what am I doing? Imagine the food I could have bought for my kids if I hadn't spent money on this Gucci bag. And if I hadn't been so reckless and irresponsible in terms of the spending. And so for her, that was her rock bottom moment where she said, do better, I can do better. I heard so many stories as I go around talking to people about women and the role and responsibility that we have so many of us are either single, we're divorced, we're from single moms, and we have such a responsibility to so many people. We're caring for our elderly parents, we're caring for our kids, and usually as women, we tend to be the strongest ones in our families, and we care for our other siblings and cousins and friends. And there's just so much responsibility put on us that I just feel like we need to just take time to think about our situation and what are we doing to make sure that we are positioning ourselves for success. There's so many women who encounter health issues, be it cancer, diabetes, mental illness, and so many of these things stem from stress. And there are so many studies done on the impact of stress from financial situations that play out in many, many ways. And a lot of times those mental stressors manifest themselves physically in terms of illness. And so some of you in the room know that my sister is suffering from stage 4 ovarian cancer. I tell her all the time, I think it's stress related. Like, you gotta take some self-care. Think about what's going on in your life and how you get help with those mental stressors so that we can be healthy not only for ourselves, but for the people that we care about. So I'm here today because financial literacy and financial wellness, particularly for women, is just something that I have always felt a calling to do. I know with my own journey, part of it was get an education, get out of this situation. So as I continued through Hopkins and after that awful experience I just shared with you, part of it for me was making sure that I spread the wealth and that I could talk to other people about what's on the other side. I was one of the few people in the city of New Haven who was given the opportunity to go to a school like Hopkins. People in my neighborhood barely got out of that 3 or 4 block radius. They didn't even know Hopkins existed. I had the opportunity, though, to become friends with a lot of very, very wealthy people. I would go to my friends' houses for dinners and sleepovers, and I saw some of the most beautiful homes that I thought only existed on TV. And then I realized that there are people who actually live like this. And I made it my mission to find out, how did you get here? And so I'd go to my friends' houses and the kids would be out in the pool playing and I'd be in the kitchen. So what did you major in college? and how did you get? Like, I need to understand. And my friends would come in like, oh my God, Medina, can we stop? But I took that very, very seriously because I didn't want to waste that opportunity. And to me, being at a school like Hopkins wasn't just about the education, it was about the exposure. I learned to ski for the first time with one of my friends who took me on a trip with her and her family. I learned all about technology, all about finance from my friends' parents who were in those types of roles. And so when I finished at Hopkins, I went to Wesleyan, and I remember starting the first minority pre-law society at Wesleyan because I wanted to go to law school, and there were other classmates of mine who wanted to go to law school, and none of us had parents who were lawyers. We didn't really know what that process was like. And so spreading that knowledge and bringing people together with common interests and common goals has always been something that I found very, very effective. One of the things that I like to say is, it takes a village, but sometimes it just takes one person to make the village realize the power. And I like to think that I inspire people to realize the power within them to change their situation and to really make an impact in the world. And so one of the questions that I have for anybody here, and I don't want to stand here and talk to you for an hour, but one of the questions that I like to pose people to really get people thinking is, think about that moment in your life where you had that experience where you said, this is my rock bottom moment. I can do better than this. It could have been a time where you got evicted from an apartment. Could have been a time you had to put up a GoFundMe page to fund the funeral costs for a loved one, and you realized, I can do better than this. Most of us have had some life event that happened where we realized that although we are functioning, we can function a lot better. So I'm going to see if anybody brave in the audience wants to share a rock bottom moment. Lori? Yeah, can we get a microphone?
Hi, Lori, I'm a retired high school teacher. I got married at 29. I met the love of my life. Didn't turn out. We got divorced.